legs, they can go and they can borrow. And it's always been, you know, oh, my bank's in trouble, I don't want to borrow from the discount window. But now they've changed that whole attitude. Please come to the discount window. Bring us all your bad debt. Bring your mortgage securities. We'll take anything. And they can get bailed out, and banks have still been reluctant. And that is what they're trying to do. That's why they're facilitating. They're changing the nature of the discount bank so they need that in addition to just lowering overnight rates. And that's just inflation. And this is what I got after Bernanke for the other day. I said, how can you solve the problems of inflation with more inflation? The markets wants deflations. It's politically unacceptable. That's why expect more erosion of your dollar. Okay, go ahead if you have somebody there. I see in the middle back there.
The opposition in Syria. Syria being a place that Iran's ally, or Iran has been very involved. Does that put America and Americans at home at greater risk of these sorts of attacks, in your view?
Yes, it does. That can't be enough to stop us from doing whatever we feel we have to do. I would see even the tightening of the sanctions increases the risk. I think obviously if we get engaged with Syria or with Iran ultimately and the confrontation with Israel, then yes, that definitely increases the likelihood that Iran and or Hezbollah would strike within the United States. We're assuming that. We're assuming which is why we're trying to monitor everyone in this country who has had contacts with Hezbollah in the past, who is associated with Hezbollah. Some are just into fundraising, others are facilitators, but we're monitoring them very, very carefully.
Well, isn't that an interesting opening, people? Welcome for another live television show. And I want to thank Rick's House of Pizza in Orcutt. We'll have more of them a little later. You know, Ron Paul was just one of my most favorite people. This flyer, I mean, I know the election's over. They've cheated him out of his votes. They cheated him out of his victories, his delegates. They didn't let him show up at the Republic, but now we are going to pay the price. We are going to pay heavily. I like this little flyer. You can't see it very well, but this little flyer really shows Ron Paul. But if you zoom in on his face, if the camera could zoom in close enough, you would see that this picture of Ron Paul is really made up of thousands of pictures of Americans. All kinds of Americans. That's close enough. Yeah, you can get in there. That's Ron Paul, but he really represented America. He really, truly did. Doctors, lawyers, architects, engineers, especially logical thinkers, supported him big time. They cheated him in 2008. They gave us McCain, who was a sure loser. And as I told you back in 2007, McCain will not win. Ron Paul was our one hope, and I said the same thing in 2012. So why do we keep getting people we don't really like? Could it be the elections are rigged? Of course they are. Of course they are. However, locally, there was one local county supervisor race here. Joni Gray, who was just about as worthless and as useless as you could get as far as trying to talk to her, reason with her. And now we've got a replacement for her. Someone who I think will do much better because he's close to the earth, very close to the earth. He not only was screwed over by Santa Barbara County because of one little scoundrel that sent a little email off and started a lawsuit that cost him and eventually the taxpayers of Santa Barbara County. And that's what I want you to remember. Peter Adam, they tried to close down part of his fields over some kind of a little red-legged frog. When the dust settled, years and years later, Peter Adam won the lawsuit against the feds and everybody else who came against him. He won. He won. And the news media played that down. And the little scoundrel that started it all skipped out of the county, left the state, and I hear rumor that he even went all the way to New Zealand just to escape Peter Adam. So just keep in mind, Peter Adam is now the 4th District Supervisor, and he's a farmer. I think it's wonderful in a county that got built on the farming industry and still is heavily into farming and ranching to have at least one member there who represents the people who are close to the earth. Way to go, Peter Adam. And I loved watching, you probably missed it, but I loved watching a supervisor's meeting, which normally I don't enjoy watching those things, but I heard the word extortion, I think at least twice out of Peter Adams' lips and twice out of somebody else's lips. And the rest of the supervisors didn't like that word. Too bad. Somebody finally gets elected who will tell the truth and represent the people. Now, with that, I want to mention that 8 years ago, this show, we had 2 people here that were claiming they were for the children. They wanted to save all the abused children. Michael Jackson was on trial in 2005, and the trial started just about this week, 8 years ago in February, to the public. Jury selection had started earlier. And I had these 2 people, and they were, yeah. And I finally said, do you really think Michael Jackson, are you sitting here saying Michael Jackson abused these kids? We haven't even heard any evidence. And they said, well, finally, when I backed them in, these were people holding up corners, victims' rights, and shouting at the fence. Poor Michael Jackson. He was totally and completely innocent. I can certify that because I was at the trial every day except the 3 days they kicked me out for shaking hands with Tito and his brother Jackie Jackson. And no, the jury didn't see it and the judge didn't see it, but there was one bailiff who really didn't like my reporting on that trial. And it was a trial by media and a trial by a malicious, dirty four prosecutors. Anyway, 8 years ago, we had these two people on, and when I finally pushed them and said, "Are you saying this about Michael?" They said, "Well, we don't know, but we think, we'll see what the jury says." Well, the jury said not guilty times 10, and now it's time to indict the Dirty Four. The Dirty Four are Tom Sneddon, who's now retired, Ron Zonen, Gordon Auchincloss, and that little Egyptian guy, Mag Nicola. I wish they'd let Mag Nicola do the whole trial, and the other three sat on their thumbs. Mag Nicola did such a horrible job that after one day, they never let him open his... He totally screwed up their presentation because, in fact, they didn't have any evidence, and they were trying to get one of their own prosecutor's witnesses to lie. And the guy wouldn't lie. He said, no. He looked up and said, the phone chart on the wall, "You've got this all wrong." Yay for him. One guy who was actually the prosecutor's witness stuck it to, he really stuck it to the prosecutors, because he was also a person of integrity. And whatever he may have said before he got on the witness stand, he stuck it to the prosecutors after he was on the witness stand. And Debbie Rowe, who was wined and dined, and oh, they treated her so nice. But when she got on the stand, she said Michael Jackson is a wonderful father, a perfect gentleman. She never saw him do anything wrong with any child. That was the death knell for the prosecution. And these Dirty Four prosecutors should be indicted by a special prosecutor. I just thought I'd mention that, as I've been saying that for the last 8 years. Thought I'd say it again. Anyway, children do get injured. Unfortunately, they're usually injured by the government. If you look closely at our opening that we just ran tonight, not the first one with Ron Paul, but the second opening we ran, you would notice there was a flashing guy, SWAT team, like a soldier, covered head to black and got a big gun. And the fact that bothers me, and the reason I showed you that, is you are 8 times more likely in America to be killed by a cop than a mass terrorist. Think about that one. These are just statistical facts. You are 8 times more likely. In our next Friday live show, I hope to bring you some witnesses who had a member of their family who was not attacking the police, and they just filled him full of bullets and killed him while he was looking at his family, arms up and open. So with that, I want to remind you about a guy that's long since been forgotten. He was killed in the infamous Valley Street Jail in New Hampshire. And when he had been arrested for disorderly drunken conduct or something, he was going through an ugly divorce. He wasn't being allowed to see his son. His son's name was Armstrong. And so this young, unemployed, 41-year-old welder was in jail. He wasn't making any fuss. I've had the only witness who was in that jail who spoke up on my show way back in 2004, almost 9 years ago. But I thought I'd show you the father and mother and how devastated. So I'm going to zip back now to an old clip. It's only a minute and 2. Both his father and his mother are now dead. But this clip was not filmed by me. It was filmed by another non-custodial dad who has also been killed by the legal system. See you. 2 minutes. Watch.
historical information included statements by Mr. Bahktar that were not consistent with observations made. This includes the fact that the person who actually carried Andrea Nelson into the emergency room felt that she was cold to touch and already cyanotic. That is, due to lack of oxygen, there was a change in coloration to her lips and other portions of her body. This was inconsistent with the history provided by Mr. Bahktar that she had just become unresponsive in a car within 20 to 30 minutes or so of arriving in the emergency room. Additionally, there are some suspicious findings in the autopsy, one of which included a bruise on the inside of the lower lip, which was automatically attributed by the coroner's office to being a complication of intubation. However, when a person is intubated, and I'll try to do a demonstration of it, the mouth is open and a laryngoscope is put in back across the tongue. And if there's any bruising, it's to the upper lip as pressure is applied to open up the airway. It's not to the lower lip. Plus the fact that there is bruising on the inside and no evidence of impact on the outside is consistent with pressure being applied rather than any type of blow to the lower lip, and certainly not consistent with the attempts at intubation. In addition, there were pinpoint hemorrhages on the surfaces of her lungs, which are consistent with some upper airway obstructions, such as a smothering or suffocation. It doesn't mean that that has to be, that's not the only reason why you can get petechial hemorrhages, but it is suspicious in somebody who allegedly is dying of a drug overdose, because it's not a common finding. Matter of fact, it's not a finding in drug overdoses where people either die of a sudden cardiac event.
So there's Dr. Bonnel, who I went to San Diego to interview, and he's claiming Andrea Nelson was murdered. At the time I did the interview, and it's a long interview, it goes out more than an hour, but the bottom line was that girl did not overdose on cocaine voluntarily administered. And there's lots of evidence, but you have to protect the crooked sheriff, Mike Corona, oops, who's now in federal prison for other crimes, but they haven't nailed him for covering up the murder of Linda. Now, I want to take you to another crime where the cops and the coroners and the police are in cahoots to cover up the murder of 41-year-old Brian Armstrong. Here are his parents. They are now dead, and the guy interviewing Bob Berg has been on my show, and he's now dead. Watch this, be back.